Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PHLY Eagles podcast on a Monday morning, high noon. Bo Wulf, Zach Berman, back in the fold, back together in studio. Zach, how you doing?
Doing great. Excited to be back. Happy to see you again. Happy to see Joy again, and eager to talk about what's ahead. It's April 1st, which means it's April Fool's Day, which means
Haason Reddick wasn't traded.
Yeah, it's my father-in-law's birthday. Happy birthday to him! But it's draft month.
That's what he wants you to think.
Yeah, it's it's draft month, and so I'm excited for the shows and the weeks ahead here because this is a buzzy time, if you will.
Buzz. Okay.
Yeah.
A buzzy time. little floating bee, Zach Berman. Great job holding down the fort last week with Handsome Rich. Great job by Handsome Rich and everybody involved. We will get to draft chatter eventually, but today, no more tomfoolery, no more shenanigans. We got a lot to talk about, Zach, because on Friday late afternoon, the Eagles pull a classic news dump.
Yes.
With the Haason Reddick trade being announced. Haason Reddick going to the New York Jets in exchange for a 2026 draft pick that starts as a third-round pick and could become a second-round pick if he plays over 65% of the snaps.
67.5%.
Oh, okay. Or has over 10 sacks. Is that right?
No, and.
It has to be both.
Has to be both.
Kind of wild. You don't often see an and in a trade calculation like that. We will get to the compensation level. We will get to what it means for the Eagles roster. Does it change their draft plans? I'm curious who you think the Eagles are betting on most in letting Haason Reddick go. But I want to start with, it seemed like this was inevitable.
Yes.
And it certainly turned out to be. There was talk about maybe the Eagles could wait a little bit because the veteran trade market right now is not so hot, right? The returns are not what you might expect. Certainly the return for a player in Haason Reddick, who is only the second player in the Eagles franchise over the past 20 years to have back-to-back 10-sack seasons, a guy who has been one of the most productive pass rushers in the league over the past 2, 3, 4 years and is only turning 30 years old. Not a huge return. Why do you think it was that this was inevitable? Why is it that this was a marriage that was headed for divorce?
Yeah, that's something that I think Eagles fans are trying to unpack. It was pretty clear going back to last training camp. Haason Reddick wasn't enthralled by his deal. He played on it last year. He wanted a new deal. It wasn't going to be a conducive situation for him to return on that current contract. So what the Eagles could have done, there were two options there then: trade him or re-sign him. It wasn't going to be playing on this deal. I think the comp for re-signing him, from where I sit, is probably the Danielle Hunter contract. 2 years, $49.5 million, right? I mean, they're both really productive edge rushers, around the same age. So I don't think the Eagles were ready to pay Haason Reddick that type of money. Then when they signed Bryce Huff, it really signaled it was going to be Reddick or Sweat, or perhaps both, being traded. Then when they restructured Sweat's deal to bring him back, Sweat being Josh Sweat, of course, then it was clear that Reddick would be moved. So the inevitability of it made it seem like it was just a matter of to whom and for how much. But yeah, there is an alternative here. The alternative would have been paying Reddick. It just seemed the Eagles didn't value Reddick at a price point at this point in his career that Reddick wanted.
There was, some reporting about the Eagles being unhappy with the way that Sweat and Reddick were, playing the run in the second half of the season. Haason Reddick's numbers did not drop off quite as dramatically as Josh Sweat's did over the second half of the season, but he was certainly part of a unit that was not productive in the second half of the season. Do you think that this is just contract? Do you think there are some personality dynamics involved here? Like, do you think Haason Reddick said, "I'm not coming back under any circumstances"? What do you make of just like why this was definitely happening?
Yeah, well, I don't think Reddick was coming back under his current deal, right? So it's always everything, right? It's never just one thing. But I think more than anything, this is contract motivated. I don't necessarily think it's personality or play motivated. Now, if their frustration was the run defense, then
Give me
bringing
a
in
break.
Bryce Huff's not gonna.
Well,
Yeah, I mean that's not like, oh, we solved it with Bryce Huff, right? The reality is this: I think that Haason Reddick, they would have had to make a major commitment. Look, the top 10 edge rushers in the NFL all make over $20 million. Like I said, the Daniil Hunter contract showed what the market would be for someone who's approaching 30 who has this type of production. When you give someone the chance to seek a trade, you're essentially like preparing for life without that person. And so, yeah, the inevitability of it was, I think more than anything else, this was contract motivated. Now I'm curious to see what the Jets do with that contract, but this has been going on for nearly 2 months, right? This was before the combine when this came out. So a month and a half to 2 months, and the Eagles at the end of the season probably knew there was there was a line in the sand at edge rusher. I mean, speaking of Haason Reddick at the end of the season, it certainly seemed like he was expecting something to happen with the contract, right? So, yeah, I have to think the contract was the motivating factor here.
and I would imagine, without having gotten like a truth serum conversation with Haason Reddick, that he was expecting. Usually, the way things go is if I'm coming back and you're going to make me play on this deal, there's sort of an implicit agreement that like we're gonna make you whole after the season's over, right? And maybe the Eagles offered what they thought was fair value, and Reddick didn't think that was fair value, and that was the breaking point. But I mean, it is not, generally speaking, like Howie Roseman's roster building worldview that we're going to get rid of our best pass rusher for a return that is, underwhelming.
Well, so I actually disagree as far as like the understanding that we'll make you whole. I think it was more kind of the understanding, all right, you play on this deal in year 2, and then year 3, we'll either pay you or move you, right? I think that's more the understanding than anything else. Is I don't think it was ever play on this deal and then we'll give you $25 million a year next year, right? And so it is uncustomary for them to trade one of the elite edge rushers in the league. And that's what it like. I said this on Anthony's show today. Make sure you're all watching the Anthony Gargano show every day, 9 to 11 here on PHLY.
It's fun to be here now that the show is going. There's a different vibe in the office, I feel.
But and you know how this works is that oftentimes in this league, when a player's on the way out, you hear rationalizations or, well, really he was bolstered by this, or this was, this decline was like, there's no rationalizing from my perspective Haason Reddick as a player. He's one of the elite players, or he's one of the elite edge rushers. That's a premium skill. The numbers over the past...
He's one of the best 5 people in the league at doing the most important thing on defense.
Like the numbers bear this out. The tape bears this out. So yeah, there's no spin. They're not a better football team today than they were 3 days ago, or 5 days ago rather.
And you speak of the rationalizations. You can spin it as like, well, would you rather have Haason Reddick or would you rather have Bryce Huff and an extra $7 million and an extra draft pick? But like, I don't know. That's still a roll of the dice.
Yeah, so it's similar to, I mean, it's not apples for apples, but it's similar to Kansas City. Like L'Jarius Sneed's a great player, but they weren't going to pay L'Jarius Sneed that contract, right? I don't think the Eagles were prepared to pay Haason Reddick the contract that he wants, and I think that's what it comes down to. To me, you can't say, well, hey, he's a one-trick guy. Like you can't say, he's turning 30. No, he's really good at getting to the quarterback. There was a noticeable difference. I talked about the effect that A.J. Brown had on the offense when they added him. There was that effect for the defense when they added Haason Reddick, right? He made the other players around him better.
No doubt.
Like, so there's no football rationalization here. To me, it's the overall outlook of how you build a roster. and the money you're going to allocate. And I think the Eagles would rather spend $17 million on Bryce Huff and have that cash to allocate elsewhere, the future cap space to allocate elsewhere. The pick is part of that. We'll get to that. Then paying $25 million a year for Haason Reddick.
I actually don't read it as this is what they would rather do. I read it as this is what they had to do. Like, I think if they thought that Haason Reddick could come back and that was a marriage that they could save, I think they would have wanted to. For whatever reason, I think they knew going into the offseason that we're not bringing him back. And so what's the next best thing we can do? Well, we can get some compensation. We can sign a guy like Bryce Huff who can replace him. I don't think that it was like, which one would we rather have? This is like a Howie Galaxy brain thing where he's able to finesse it all and the team comes out better on the other side. I think this is like, this was the best medicine they could take.
Well, yeah, maybe so. They haven't. So they paid Trent Cole top of near top of the league money, but if you look at how they've kind of structured edge rushing contracts, they would rather pay one guy in like today's money $17 million and another guy $15 million or whatever it may be. They'd rather pay two guys than pay one guy $25 to $30 million. Like that's kind of they haven't been top of the league in edge rushing spending.
Well, yeah, but when they have had an opportunity to do that, like if
they haven't had that type of player,
right?
I mean, my point being that I don't think they were prepared to pay Haason Reddick the contract that Haason Reddick wanted.
Sure,
and I said that
like
if
they had Myles Garrett, they wouldn't be like, well, we'd rather have two okay guys.
Sure, yeah, but I kind of think that's the line of thinking here that Haason Reddick was. And I'm curious to see what happens with the Jets. Like I keep seeing this stuff from the Jets side where if he leaves in free agency, you're going to get a comp pick for him. I don't see Haason Reddick playing under this deal. Like I think if you trade for Haason Reddick,
think so, but that hasn't been reported, right?
Yeah, it was reported that they're working on a new deal, but there hasn't been a deal out. So I'm curious what that number comes in at, but I don't think this was a situation where the Eagles were like hoping to miss. I think there was a contract that Haason Reddick wanted, and they weren't going to pay that number.
I think it was in my mind. It's like, okay, let's begin our offseason planning. We're not going to get Haason Reddick back.
Yeah.
What can we get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe part of that is like, well, can we like get Josh Sweat on a better deal? And like let's seed it out there that we're willing to trade either one of these guys, and maybe that'll work in our favor, and we can get Sweat on a better deal because he had this terrible second half of the season. He sort of wore down a little bit,
which happened,
and so that worked out. Like I give Howie Roseman credit if it is the fact that like they knew he was gone. They got enough out of it. Now about the compensation, Zach, we talked about how underwhelmed we were by the return for Brian Burns compared to what the Rams supposedly offered for him a season and a half ago. And L'Jarius Sneed's only getting a third-round pick. What do you make of the return for Haason Reddick? Is that enough?
Well, is it enough? I said going into this, I thought a second-round pick is what you shoot for, right? Actually, I was probably wrong about this when we were on Shields Pod at the Super Bowl. I said I thought they can get more for Sweat than for Reddick. I thought Reddick was a second-round pick. When you see what some of the other deals were for top veteran players, maybe a second-round pick would have been ambitious. I consider this a third-round pick, right? If you just look last year, Jermaine Johnson, their top edge rusher, played 65.8% of the snaps. Quinton Williams, their all-pro defensive tackle, different position, but he plays 68.5% of the snaps. Bryce Huff.
Such a specific number, yeah.
Like these guys, the Jets rotate. The Jets are a team that rotates along the line. They would really need to kind of break course for Haason Reddick to play 75-80% of the snaps. That's not the way they typically use that spot under Robert Saleh. And of course, they also know that the future picks kind of on the line here. So
but actually, that's why I think that making it 2026 is interesting here, because it means that it's like this is such a make or break year for the Jets.
Yeah.
And if Reddick doesn't get a new deal, like he's going to want to be on the field as much as possible.
Sure.
Like both of them are going to be incentivized for him to try to chase those numbers. But
yeah, so Yeah, it's not the ideal comp. I got to think, and I will give Howie Roseman credit on this. Like he's this is not like when the Patriots traded Jimmy Garoppolo, and they were painted into a corner and they had to make a deal. Like they've had 2 months here to scan the market. One would think that if there was a better deal out there, they would have gotten that deal. Like this was a very public thing.
And this
that
was
Haason Reddick was out there.
today, April 1st was the day that they pushed the
Yeah.
roster bonus forward to. So it seems like that actually turned out to be something of a deadline.
Well, they're still paying that roster bonus.
Oh, they are. That's right.
Yeah. But certainly from the league perspective, yeah. So,
Which is, I'm surprised by that. Like, I think Howie Roseman would probably tell you that like they're very good at waiting to get the value that they want. Like this was the value that you wanted. You couldn't finesse those like the conditions for the pick a little bit more. Like you could have made it 60% in 10 sacks.
Yeah.
Like,
So that's the thing too. And I wrote this on PHLY.com. Like, what's the alternative other than paying him? The alternative would have been holding him until after the draft. Because there's 2 things that happen after the draft. First off, maybe the team that wanted an edge rusher in the first round, it doesn't go their way. Maybe a team traded back and they have more draft inventory. And you've really hit this on the head in the past. And I think this is very accurate for the way the league thinks, that teams they hold on to their picks that they have now. Right, especially this time of year, like that pick has a name attached to it. They're saying, "All right, are you giving up 4 years of control of player X?" And that's why, by the way, the Eagles have historically valued future picks more than other teams have, because and they're the beneficiaries of it this year. They have a second round pick that they got in a trade in 2022, so they're willing to push a pick down the line after the draft. A team saying, "All right, this is what our roster looks like. We really need edge rushing help." Like that's the alternative here.
Yeah, I feel like if you're willing to take a 2026 pick in return here, why not wait until after the draft and see who needs a guy?
Yeah. Now you could also say it could work the other way. Like the Jets could take Dallas Turner in the first round, and they don't need that edge rusher anymore. And now the market narrowed even more. I tend to think it actually works the other way, that teams miss out on guys that they might be targeting, or they look at their going into the draft, everything's kind of like theoretical for the team. After the draft, you say, all right, this is what the depth chart is. This is where we need to address it. So the alternative would have been waiting. I don't mind the 2026 part of it. It's not ideal. I just would have liked a better pathway to a second round pick there. I think if you're pushing it down the line, then what you're hoping for is like, all right, this has a better chance of becoming that second. You can justify it by saying, we wanted a second at the start of this. It wasn't there in 2024. It's going to be hard to get in 2025. 2026, teams are more willing to give away that second round pick. So I guess my criticism of the comp is a better pathway to the second.
Yeah, I do find the timing odd. I find it odd that like if you were going to try to tell me that this is the return, this was their price, and somebody finally met their price, like I find it hard to believe that this was the price, that they were the line in the sand. Now, I would say that if there's any team in the league who I would rather have their 2026 pick than their 2025 pick, it's probably the Jets.
Sure.
Like that is a team that is all in this year, and if Aaron Rodgers plays 10 games, great, but he's not going to play in 2 years. Like that team's going to be awful in 2025, right? And like that's good. And I actually think that he's gonna get the conditions.
Interesting.
I think this is gonna be like one of the first 5 picks in the second round, and 2 years from now, everybody's gonna be like, look at this amazing thing that Howie Roseman did. And he got us the 38th pick for Haason Reddick, and we got Bryce Huff, who's almost as good. And it'll be like, Howie does it again. And I don't think it's enough for Reddick because
I disagree there.
No. I mean, if they get that, that's fine. But I don't think that the odds of that is enough of a return for Reddick. I think they could have been a little bit more patient. And I also think, to Howie Roseman's credit, and this is also this is a Jeffrey Lurie thing, not every GM can afford to be this patient, right? Sure. This is the benefit of the job security that Howie Roseman has, is that he can be willing to accept a pick 2 years down the line. And it's not discounted as much as it might be in other places, because they don't need to prove that they have to keep their job.
Yeah, we've had this conversation in the past, and it's like a chicken or an egg thing. Like, does he have the job security so he can make the trade, or does he have the job security because he makes this type of trade, right? Like, because Jeffrey Lurie very much looks at it like, where are the inefficiencies in the marketplace? And one thing, and I know this is a longstanding organizational belief going back to Joe Banner, that the way future picks are valued is inconsistent with the way they value those picks. And to the point you made about the Jet season, like the Eagles very much like they have internal models that they use to, now it's not always the case, but to project out how teams are going to be. And you can't project out. There's so much that's good. Like, you don't know what the 2025 Jets are going to look like, right? But they have an idea of what the 2024 Jets are going to look like, right? So they could be looking at it and saying, we would much rather gamble on a 2026 pick than a 2025 pick for the very reasons that you mentioned, that their models bear this out, that pick is most likely going to be at the end of, say, the bottom third of the second round or the third round, based on what their models say the Jets are going to be, that there's more upside in 2026.
There you go. All right. Well, if you are hoping to make some bets like Howie Roseman is making bets, we are brought to you by the BetParks app. Welcome aboard, BetParks. I was looking at the app just before the show. I am very excited for these women's college basketball games tonight. Caitlin Clark going up against LSU looked like Iowa was a 3.5 point or a 1.5 point favorite. And then I was surprised to see UConn favored over USC and Juju Watkins. So that's a fun one that you can put some hooch on if you're buckling up for that doubleheader tonight. Get in the zone with the BetParks Sports app. Win big with all-day action and win your first $10 bet and earn $125 in sports bonus bets. You play for fun, you love to win, you bet. Download the app and play along with us at BetParks. Must be 21 or older. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
I was at the Phillies game yesterday, and my son wanted a soda. Didn't get him a soda yesterday, but I was thinking, like, all right, is there a healthy alternative here? And I wish Olipop was available, because Olipop is the world's first functional soda with a classic soda taste and the benefits of plant-based fiber, prebiotics, and other botanical ingredients that support gut health. Olipop is a new kind of soda with only 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 9 grams of fiber per can. It's available online and available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including their most recent launch at all Wawa stores. Olipop's debut in Wawa couldn't be more of a match made in heaven. A delicious, healthy drink meets a convenience store, both adored by a cult following. And they have 2 flavors debuting in Wawa, which are classic root beer and strawberry vanilla. Those are the 2 most popular flavors. Almost every American has some sort of relationship with soda from their childhood. Some people grew up drinking it all the time and then quit, and some people are still addicted to it and then trying to quit. But that's where you should turn to Olipop, because 90% of Americans consume more than the USDA's daily recommended added sugar intake. Sweetened beverages are the leading source of added sugars in the American diet, and that's why Olipop is so valuable, is that there's much lower sugar than conventional sodas, with only 2 to 5 grams of sugar from natural sources. Use the code PHLY20 for 20% off your next Olipop order. The discount only applies to one-time orders, not to subscription orders. Olipop is sold online, drinkolipop.com. Plus, it's also available at Amazon, and it's available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including Wawa, Target, Sprouts, Wegmans, ShopRite, and GoPuff.
All right, Zach. So with Haason Reddick gone, the Eagles have Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, Brandon Graham, maybe Zach Bond in the mix after the Andrew Van Ginkel comparisons that were hoisted upon him. In making this deal and getting rid of Haason Reddick, who do you think that Howie Roseman is betting on the most on this Eagles defense?
Yeah, good question. Because when you asked me that out there, I was thinking about it, and I would say the obvious answer is Bryce Huff. And the obvious answer is Bryce Huff because they paid him $17 million a year. He's the highest paid edge rusher on the team, right? So literally the investment's the highest, other than draft resources, which they spent on Nolan Smith. The age profile, what they project is kind of the curve there. I think, and this is in an ideal world, he's what Haason Reddick was, an up-and-coming pass rusher when they signed him, who's better in his contract with the Philly with the Eagles than he was before that. So I think the literal thing they're counting on is Bryce Huff, who had 10 sacks last year as a 40% player, being a 15-sack guy at 60%, right? And then we can talk about Nolan Smith, first-round pick last year, who was not nearly as productive, and we'll get to that conversation. But the player that I just want to highlight here is Josh Sweat. And the reason I say that is because I think there's almost Josh Sweat had a bad end to the season. And it's almost viewed almost like James Bradbury now, right? Like, can you count on this guy? I view the context much differently. Josh Sweat, who took a pay cut to stay, right? We talked about that, is trying to maximize his value going into the free agent market next year. From the beginning of the 2022 season to the bye week of 2023, and you could say those are arbitrary numbers, but that's a 25-game sample size there. Would have been 26. He missed a game. 25-game sample size there. Josh Sweat was top 10 in the league in sacks. He was tied with Brian Burns for 10th in the league. He was number 8 in the league in quarterback hits during that time. Josh Sweat was on a trajectory. Like, his numbers were improving every year. He was outplaying the contract that they signed him on. We've spoken to people in that locker room. Lane Johnson's been very public about this. Chris Long's been very public about this, that Josh Sweat has tools that are rare at that position. And he went silent production-wise during the back half of the schedule. If they get the Josh Sweat that they had for that year and a half, then you have a number 1 or 1A, like maybe a 1B, but you have a Pro Bowl edge rusher, all right? Josh Sweat wasn't that in November and December last year. If he can be what he was for that year and a half before then I think the Eagles' pass rush will be what they need it to be.
I think the most important context that you said there is that he took a pay cut, right? Like, if the Eagles expected him, if Josh Sweat expected himself to be one of the top 10 pass rushers in the league, he would not have taken a pay cut.
Good point. I just think that Josh Sweat,
I mean, that does not happen very often.
No, I think Josh Sweat realizes that he needs to maximize his value this year to get the deal that he wants next year.
Yeah.
And I think that's the calculation.
So the reason I asked you this question is because as I was thinking about it, the way that I view it is that the person that Howie Roseman is really betting on here in accepting, because I don't think that you can expect Josh Sweat to be a top 10 edge rusher next year. I don't think that's what he's being paid. I don't think that's like the deal he took. And even Bryce Huff is definitely a projection. Nolan Smith, what you can get from him, I view as sort of gravy. I think they need to rotate a little bit more. That's obviously part of the reason that Josh Sweat's production fell off. But I think that what they're really betting on here is the Jalen Carter ascension.
Interesting.
And if
the interior rush.
And if Jalen Carter can be one of the 3 best pass rushing defensive tackles in the league, then all of a sudden everything becomes easier for the guys on the outside. You think about the 2017 Eagles, right? You had Fletcher Cox dominating inside, and you didn't have, a dominant edge rusher. You had the rotating guys, and any one of them can get to the quarterback at any point. I think if Jalen Carter is who they think he can be, then they're fine on the edge. And we'll get to like the draft expectations for edge rusher. Do they need to draft an edge rusher? To me, this is like, if Jalen Carter is the guy, is the dude on that defense, then we're fine. We don't need Haason Reddick.
Yeah, I disagree with you there, because I look at the interior rush and the edge rushing as kind of different arguments. They do need Jalen Carter to make that ascension, but I mean, the Vic Fangio defense that's kind of pointed to as like those. So let's take the 49ers defense when he was there, right? You had Justin Smith wrecking havoc on the inside, right? But you also had Alton Smith like being a difference maker on the edge. And I think that's you need those two things in conjunction. The Jalen Carter thing, I agree with you there.
You don't need edge rushers.
No, but I'm saying like you need, for this defense to be what it's going to be, you need a top 10, top 15 edge rusher, right? And that 2017 defense, they did not have that. I mean, Brandon Graham was good. Vinny Curry was solid. Chris Long was productive, right? But Derek Barnett was productive, but they didn't have that guy who you say, all right, this guy's top 15 in the league. And the Eagles need Look, Bryce Huff's being paid to be a top 20 edge rusher. Bryce Huff needs, as I said, he was a 10-sack guy last year, 40% of the snaps. They need Bryce Huff to be 13 to 15 sacks this year, right? And this, by the way, goes like, I keep pointing this out. I'm a big, like, sacks aren't overrated guy. You know, some defensive ends will disagree, and they're far more educated at this than I am. But from 2014, when Connor Barwin had, 14 and a half sacks, to 2022, when Haason Reddick had, and Josh Sweat and Brendan Graham, like they all feasted. The Eagles did not have a single edge rusher reach double-digit sacks, which this is not a position where they've had that high-level production in terms of sacks. Haason Reddick gave you that.
That's why they weren't paying a guy.
Yeah,
they didn't have that guy.
True. Haason Reddick can be that, or Haason Reddick was that type of player. He changed the defense. So they really need Bryce Huff and/or Josh Sweat and/or Nolan Smith to be that type of player. Nolan Smith is the wild card.
But that's what I'm saying, is that if Jalen Carter is as good as they think he can be, it becomes easier for those guys.
Sure.
Their job becomes easier. And then, like, if Bryce Huff is not getting the attention, like the double team attention of opposing offenses, then he can get to 13, 15 sacks. But if he is all of a sudden the focal point and Jalen Carter is just kind of a guy, then it's going to be hard for, I think, those guys to make headway.
So you're saying the key here is Jalen Carter being...
I think so.
Okay. Look, I'm not going to disagree. I mean, they need Jalen Carter to take that jump, but I still think they need either Bryce Huff or Josh Sweat to be a top 15 edge rusher in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think they would like that.
Yeah.
And I think part of what makes that path easier is if Jalen Carter is a top 3 guy.
What's your read on Nolan Smith?
You know, I don't have super high expectations for Nolan Smith, but, you know, a guy plays 1 year in the league that is nowhere near close to, like, writing the story of his career. I think that Nolan Smith's value to them in this Vic Fangio defense is his versatility. Like, I don't think that Nolan Smith is going to turn into Haason Reddick, whereas he's undersized, but he's one of the best pass rushers in the league. I think Nolan Smith is going to be, you know, the guy who can drop for you a little bit and, you know, brings a little bit of pass rush juice. But this goes back to, like, the conversation we had in the draft last year. Like, Nolan Smith was not a productive pass rusher in college. He was playing for 4 years. Like, he's got these amazing physical tools, and they never manifested into production. I am not betting on that he's going to turn into, like, a 14-sack guy.
Yeah. Well, so don't roll your eyes when I say this.
I think he can be a good football player who is not an elite edge rusher.
So don't roll your eyes when I say this, okay? Because I agree, and I've made that point. He was not a prolific sack producer in college. I think what they would kind of push back on is that he was a productive pass rusher based on certain advanced metrics, including quarterback hits, pressure rate, things of that nature. Now, that's where I say sacks matter, and I've used this point, and I'll use it when we have an edge rusher conversation, when we do an edge rusher show. Like, Elvis Dumervil was a really productive college pass rusher. He didn't have certain measurements. He was a really productive NFL pass rusher. I think sacks translate. For full disclosure, that's why I like the Derek Barnett pick in 2014, because I thought sacks translate. Now, Barnett wasn't the double-digit sack guy for the Eagles, but he was a productive edge rusher for a period of time there. I think that Nolan Smith, it did concern me this year that he wasn't more productive. He couldn't get on the field more, because in training camp last year, he looked really good, I thought. Now, he was doing it against backup tackles for the most part, right? And that needs to be taken into account. But there were so many things that I heard last year when they drafted him. Well, the Georgia defense isn't designed for this, right? If you look, Georgia hasn't had...
I'm so tired of this. Is not a you thing. I'm like, stop, like, football explaining to me that the Georgia defense doesn't ask its players to get sacks.
So that's what I'm saying. And then, like, well, Zach, you're making too big a deal about sacks, because actually, if you look at his pressure rate, it was like his pressures per pass rush were as high as anyone in the first round, other than Will Anderson, I think, right?
Okay.
Like
It's
there
the
was
same thing about Jordan Davis, right?
yeah.
Like,
So that's my
enough.
point. Is that all right? I keep hearing this. Well, now you're in the NFL. Let's see this materialize, and it did not materialize last year. And Nolan Smith, for full, I liked him coming out because I thought there were tools there that you just simply can't find. You can't find that type of athleticism. And he had, he was a top recruit, big piece of a national championship team. But yeah, I was underwhelmed by this. Now, he didn't get on the field. And Howie Roseman said at the Combine, after the playoff game, they talked about how he should have played more. But the Eagles were trying to win last year.
It is the biggest red flag.
Yes.
Right? And it is hard to divorce the fact that there was so much going on behind the scenes, and like we want to be able to just throw out everything that happened with Matt Patricia. But Josh Sweat was totally breaking down, right?
Yes.
Completely falling off a cliff because he had played so many snaps, way more snaps than he'd ever played in his career. This was a thing that we were following over the course of the season in the first half of the year. Why are these guys on the edge playing so many snaps? It is not the Eagles' way. And one thing that would have helped that was if they trusted Nolan Smith to be on the field for 25 snaps. And that's part, like, this is a guy who went to Georgia for 4 years. Mm-hmm. He should not be, you want to tell me like he's a projection as a body type, but to trust him on the field, why can't he get on the field?
For the first time, you and I are in agreement on Nolan Smith. Now, I did just want to float one thing by you before we transition this conversation. Zach Bond, Brandon Graham, Joey Okwara. Like, are there other pieces there before we get into the draft conversation that you say, all right, this is part of the edge rushing mix? Or do you think these are pieces that we talk about after we see how the draft materializes?
I think Bond is part of that deal.
Okay.
And I think it is, you can listen to what they say and watch what they do. Yep. They're throwing out the Andrew Van Ginkel connection to Zach Bond. Okay, I'm willing to buy that. But they went and signed him on day one. Like, this is a guy that they were targeting.
Yes.
And so, Bond's pass rush efficiency numbers are not at the level that Van Ginkel's were even before his breakout year, quote unquote. But I trust that's a guy who I think is going to be in the mix. We'll get to the draft conversation, but I actually, if you believe that Jalen Carter is going to be great, I think they're okay on the edge right now. I don't think that they need to I don't think this is all of a sudden replacing Haason Reddick is like the number 2 operating order for what they need to do roster wise.
And is Brandon Graham chief morale officer, or are you expecting productive snaps?
10 snaps a game.
Okay.
Yeah. 15 snaps a game. What about you?
Yeah,
I mean, what you get from Brandon Graham is gravy.
Exactly, and then the last one, these future deals guys, Joey Okwara, Terrell Lewis. Are they? Let's see what the roster looks like after the draft, or do you think Joey Okwara, the fact that he's gotten to the quarterback in the NFL, maybe he's someone who could be interesting here?
I mean, I don't think anybody's betting on Julian Okwara. We had our whole futures guy bracket. Did he win?
I believe so.
I think he won.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what actually pushed Howie over the edge. You watch that episode. It's like, you know what? Yes. I can trade Haason Reddick for a 2035 fourth round pick. I think that's you hope that one of those guys turns into someone who can give you 10 snaps a game, but I don't think that's not materially affecting their actual roster plans.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Before we move on to the draft, let's talk about another kind of draft. And that
great transition.
If you went to a bar and ordered yourself a nice cold Miller Lite, but you don't have to do that. You can order them right to your house. A lot has changed over the years, but one thing that hasn't is the great taste of Miller Lite. It was the original light beer, and to this day, it is still the best one. Miller Lite has more of the taste you want and less of the stuff you don't. Talked about those great college games that are coming up tonight. What would be better than watching those games, watching Caitlin Clark drain 40-footers, Kim Mulkey stomping around on the sideline, and you're sucking them back with your friends? I'm moving away from the boys. I'm going to say I'm going to be fully inclusive here.
Sure.
Be the change you want to see in the world. Sucking them back with your friends. So Miller Lite keeps it simple. Undebatable quality, great taste, only 96 calories. It's the beer that strips away everything you don't need and holds on to what matters most. A light beer that tastes like beer, less filling, and only 96 calories. The original light beer since 1975. Times change, but you can always enjoy the great taste of Miller Lite. Tastes like Miller time. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/PHLY birds, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories per 12 ounces.
I'm on Broad Street yesterday. I had my nephew in the car with me, or I have two of my nephews in the car with me. I mean, my son and my oldest nephew says, "Uncle Zach, it's a great day for a ball game, right?" And it's true, right? So there are times when it's just you're looking outside and you're like, "It's a great day to see a ball game today." But you say you don't have tickets to the game. Where do you turn? That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals and all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can go through the Gametime app and you can find tickets to these Phillies games coming up. There's last-minute tickets and flash deals and zone deals. And I mentioned the last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minutes for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater near you. But the reason why I'm emphasizing baseball tickets is because they have a great deal going on right now. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. For a limited time, all users can get, and that's all users, can get $20 off any MLB purchase of $150 or more in the Gametime app with code FIRSTPITCH. Terms apply. That's code FIRSTPITCH for $20 off from March 25th to April 14th. So it's coming up in 14 days to get your tickets in. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, Zach. So we talked about who was there on the roster. Do you think that at 22 overall, or moving up, moving down, however Howie Roseman wants to finagle things in the first round, do you think that edge rusher is a first round possibility now that Haason Reddick is gone?
So I think it's a first round possibility, but I will put a period there. Not that now that Haason Reddick is gone. I thought it was a possibility before this, because I wasn't expecting Haason Reddick to be on the roster. I don't think they were, but also, but for this reason too. One thing you and I have done in our 5 years working together is when we talk about first round, second round, we look at the future contracts, right? The only players the Eagles have under contract at edge rusher beyond this season is Bryce Huff, it's Bryce Huff and Nolan Smith. And you always need to think about that because they don't draft in the first round for the year coming up. They draft it for the rookie contract and potentially beyond, right? So I thought this was a possibility before that, knowing that Reddick and Sweat were both entering the last years of their deal. Now this gets to the thing. I don't think I don't love this edge rusher class. I think that there are years when there's just more value in the first round for edge rushers. Maybe someone like Jared Verse falls. Maybe the Eagles are tantalized by Chop Robinson's athletic testing and his tools. Latu from UCLA has a lot of fans in this draft. But I don't think that's where the value is going to be at 22. So I don't think it's more of a priority now. I think it was already something they were looking at. I think when you look at positions where Howie Roseman will draft in the first round, it's D-line, O-line, corner. They're not going to take a wide receiver this year in the first round. I'd be really
he's never done a
surprised.
corner.
Yeah,
We've talked about that.
Yeah, but D-line, O-line,
I actually have
corner.
some thoughts on that for later, but
okay,
the corner thing.
Yeah, yeah. D-line, O-line, corner are the positions that I was watching this year in the first round. And when I said D-line, edge rusher, like I had a mock draft a few weeks ago going into the combine where I had them taking Jared Verse. I think that it's not a 0% possibility, but I still think offensive tackle and corner are the more likely outcomes.
So you think it's more about the class and not like the state of the roster that I think you wouldn't be interested in an edge rusher.
Oh yeah, I think what if it
was an average edge rusher class?
Then I think they would certainly be in the market for it. Like if this was the draft, the Andre Dillard year, right, where it's just loaded with like edge rushers, defensive tackles, then yeah, I do think that could be a possibility because that's a premium position. I think that they can get by this year, like we said, with the players that they have, and then it's going to be a big position to watch beyond this season. But I don't think the Haason Reddick trade changes anything with their draft strategy.
Yeah, I am all about best player available.
Mhm.
Factoring in the positional importance, and if an edge rusher is standing out at the top of your board at 22, maybe you got to pull the trigger. But I would view the series of moves they've made at the position, dating back to drafting Nolan Smith last
Yeah.
year, as pretty haphazard. I think if
Okay.
they were going to use a first round pick on an edge rusher now, I don't think that that's something they should or will do. And I, even from a like how he loves edge rushers, I would be pretty blown away if he uses a first round pick on an edge rusher this year. One, because like I'm expecting a tackle.
Yeah.
It just makes too much sense.
Exactly.
And corner, we can get to later this week, but I just like, you have enough guys now.
Mhm.
And part of the reason that you had to trade Haason Reddick is because there's only so many snaps to go around. I know you want to rotate more, and it's a little bit talking out of both sides of my mouth because I'm a little bit Nolan Smith skeptical, but you got to give him a chance to play. And you sign Zach Bond, you've signed Bryce Huff, you're bringing Josh Sweat back. Like, I view that as different than drafting a tackle and he has to sit for a year or
Sure.
two behind Lane Johnson, because that's where you get tackles. I think they'll probably add a middle round
Sure.
edge rusher. I think they probably need to.
Yep.
They probably need a guy who can do like maybe a little bit of play the run on the edge and rush the passer from the inside, like a little bit of a Milton Williams type. But I like they've got too many other things to address and not enough snaps to go around there. I would be pretty surprised if I know that they've been like linked to Jared Verse and these guys.
Yeah.
That would kind of blow me away.
Yeah. Like I think the years that you find good, productive edge rushers in the 20s, like I'm thinking about TJ Watt, for instance, who was drafted 2017 draft. He was
Like
the 30th pick, but he was like the 6th or 7th edge rusher off the board, right? If you're drafting a 22 and you're getting the 2nd or 3rd best edge rusher in the class, I think that speaks to like, this is not a good class. Like, that's a position,
and all the more reason why. Like, give me the 5th best tackle. Right?
Exactly.
Like,
So that to me speaks to like, if there's a really good edge rusher in the first round, he's going the top half of the draft. And the ones who slip, it's because other edge rushers are going higher, right? I have the 2017 draft in front of me, and you have Myles Garrett, and you have Solomon Thomas, and you have Derek Barnett, and you have Jonathan Allen's an interior guy, Charles Harris, right? Tack McKinley, Taco Charlton. By the time TJ Watt goes off the board, it was a deep edge rushing class. That's not the case this year. So I think where the talent is this year, we've talked about this. This is an offensive draft class. This is quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, and they're good corners, but this is not an edge rushing class. And so it would really surprise me if the 22nd pick is an edge rusher. The only thing I could see is if, like, for some reason someone like Dallas Turner slips. And if I was doing a mock draft today, I would have Dallas Turner going to the Falcons. But if Dallas Turner slips into the teens, what's a position the Eagles would trade up for? Teams typically trade up for those who, they trade for those who pass the ball, those who protect the passer, and those who affect the passer. All right. So you would trade up for an edge rusher, but I don't think they would draft an edge rusher at 22. And again, this might be clipped as like old takes exposed. We'll see what happens.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Expose me too.
Yeah.
And people have been asking for you to expose yourself on the show, so we can connect
you
that.
can
But
expose
I
my
would be
takes, but
very
not myself.
surprised.
Yeah. I don't see that happening, but I do agree. They don't have a 3rd round pick this year. A lot can change. Howie hasn't. It's interesting. I was actually talking to Vince about this before, like the idea that they should trade. What I've always heard is that the hardest spot to trade in the first round are between 20 and 30. And when you look at where Howie's stuck and picked, it was when he was in the 20s, and often because he couldn't work out a deal to move up, right? And the reason I hear that is because teams tend to view, like, the player you're going to get at 28 is not much different than the player you're going to get at like 22. Whereas teams trade up to the teens because they see the drop off. They obviously trade up to the top 10. Teams trade up to 31 and 32 to get that 5th-year option sometimes. But when you're in the 20s, it's kind of like
he's done it before. If he did it for Dillard. Moved up for Dillard.
He moved up. Okay, yeah, he moved up 2 spots. That's true. That's true. He jumped to Houston, right? He's stuck on the board for Aguilar. Stuck on the board.
Smith.
I'm sorry. Stuck on the board for Jalen Reagor. Stuck on the board for Marcus Smith. And both those years they tried trading up, but it's harder sometimes when you're in the 20s. So this is all a way of saying we'll see what picks they add. But I think that edge rushers more likely to come in the 4th round, maybe the 3rd round if they make a trade, than it would be in the 1st round, from my perspective.
If we were playing the turkey game, what position are they going to draft, which we will do at some point. And actually, maybe that's a chance for us to get Jimmy Kempski on to give him another chance to defend the title. Like, what position are they going to draft in the 1st round? I am so heavy on tackle.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And the corner thing, we have talked about, like the Howie Roseman never having drafted a corner in the 1st round is more circumstantial than anything, right? You know, they would have tried to draft Stingley or Sauce Gardner. They wanted Surtain or J.C. Horn instead of Devontae Smith. Last year, I think they would have taken Christian Gonzalez if Carter was gone. But
not Nolan Smith.
But
that's a joke.
I think that is a little bit different than a 22. Like, I think corner is a difficult position once you get beyond like the studs.
Sure.
And so I think they would have been willing to draft a stud corner. I don't know if I think at 22 they would be willing to roll the dice on the guy who's the 3rd corner off the board and trusting their evaluation of a difficult position to project that 3 is better than 7, right? Like, picking out the guys who are 1st and 2nd best is a little easier, and those guys translate quickly. But you know, how sure are you that this guy is, AJ Terrell and not, Justin Gilbert or whoever?
Fair point. And I just think that.
I mean, I think it's a position. I think it's the 2nd most likely position in the 1st round. But tackle just makes so much sense to me.
And I think I know they could trade up, but the difference in the tackle you're going to get at 22 and the tackle you'll get at 50, to me, is much different than the corner you'll get at 22 and the corner you'll get at 50.
Exactly. Well said. All right, last thing here on Haason Reddick. I just want to give me, you're a Philly guy.
Mm-hmm.
You got a Philly guy who came in, and I like my most vivid memory of Haason Reddick is that NFC Championship game. Yep. He gets the big sack, and he's standing on the benches, just yelling at the crowd like, "This is my city," right? Yeah. What's your lasting Haason Reddick legacy in Philadelphia? 2 years, but an impressive 2 years.
Yeah, too short. That's what I would say. He's been awesome. I mean, he's been everything they could have wanted and more. They went to the Super Bowl. He was probably the best player on the field in the NFC Championship game. I wrote this. I said it earlier this show. Like, the Eagles had this dry spell of top edge rushers. Haason Reddick in 2 years here has back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. 27 sacks over 2 years, not even including the playoffs. He's been an elite player. He loved playing in Philly, right? He wanted to come back here. It was a great story. It was great while he was here. They signed him on a discount or a below market deal. That's probably a better way to frame it. And he wants the contract that he feels he earned. But I'll look back at this as saying as one of the really good signings in franchise history, one of the really productive players in franchise history. But it's a career that was too short, frankly, for the type of play. Like, this is someone, and we didn't spend much time on this show, but yeah, the alternative could have been sign him to Danielle Hunter's contract. Like, right, say we're going to pay you for high-level production over the next 2 years. And that's just not the evaluation or the valuation that they made.
Yeah, I think stylistically, he was also really fun to watch. Like, the kind of player he is. It's, it was hard not to zero in on him, on the edge, like a little bit smaller, but just had this way of bending around guys. And also, like, from a what's the most important thing, very good at getting the ball out.
Sure.
When he gets to the quarterback, very violent at the point of attack. He was a really fun player to watch.
Yeah, and I will die on this hill if I have to. Sacks matter. Like, sacks are so important, and sacks are more important than pressures. Sacks are more important and what Haason Reddick was elite at was getting to the quarterback, and like you say, taking down the quarterback, and like you said, taking the ball away too. But the Eagles haven't had anyone like that during my time covering the team, And I don't know if they'll have anyone like that in the rest of my time covering the team.
Yeah, and I think they're betting that they can still be a top 10 sack unit without having a top 10 sack player on the edge.
Well said.
Yeah. All right. Good to be back. Good to be back in the saddle.
In these last 3, 4, 5 minutes here, I spoke about this with Rich, but I didn't speak about it with you. In the time you were away, I hope it was a great vacation. The Eagles, Jake Rosenberg.
I was going to save this for tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
We'll save
it for
longer conversation.
Okay, yeah. So just a tease for tomorrow.
Tease for tomorrow. I'll talk about the shuffling of the Eagles front office, as you touched on last week, with Jake Rosenberg set to leave after the draft. What's going on there in the front office? Yeah, we got a whole week of shows.
A nice vacation for you?
Yeah, we had a good time.
Good.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you.
I was thinking about opening the show with like my Mickey Mouse voice, leaning full into it, but we're not football talk today.
When was the last time you were at Disney World before this?
I went probably over a decade ago with Rachel's family as like grown adults.
Okay. So
and then once before that in my childhood.
So how's it different? Childhood, adult, parent?
I would say the adult one was more like you go to Epcot and you're drinking around the world and going on rides that way. I had a great time with Casey. He was game for all the
nice
the roller coasters and stuff. We're still talking about Tower of Terror. We had a great time.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
I think it was more fun for me to watch them be enchanted.
And I promised myself I wasn't going to bother you too much. I think I only sent 2 texts during the day during the time there. Sometimes at night. Okay. And I appreciated you. I was surprised you listened to the shows. I appreciated that. Thank you.
Of course. So what do you think? I'm not going to listen?
Well, no. You're at Disney World with your family.
I wasn't listening while I was at Disney World. Okay. I caught up over the weekend.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, I'm thrilled that you're
there
back.
Was one point that I was going to bring up where you made the case about like how everything that the Eagles do, like it really the big thing is what is Jalen Hurts going to do? That point that you were making? Which sounded an awful lot to me like somebody saying defense doesn't matter.
that's not. I said ultimately the quarterback dictates everything, but it's not that defense doesn't matter.
That's not even right church wrong pew. That's the exact same thing.
Okay, all right. I said this to you privately. I'll say it on here. I think the last 3 shows shows how good a host you are. Right? I mean,
come on.
You keep the show moving well. I mean, I'm listening to Rich, but at the same time, I'm looking at the clock. I'm making sure that we're getting in and out of things. And the 3 shows that we did, it's the John Mulaney joke, where I said this on the air the other day, but it's one of my favorite John Mulaney jokes because this happened to me a lot as a kid, where you do a happy birthday sign, you do a big H, a big A, a big P, and then all of a sudden you're like curving the W. So we have this, not the W, the Y rather. But so you have I know how to spell happy. Okay. I had these shows mapped out, and I said Rich is these rundowns, and then we're at 12:52, and I'm like, we haven't even gotten to the 3rd segment yet. So glad you're back.
Well, that's good. That means you got leftover stuff.
There you go.
Leftover material. Happy to see Julia again. Julia, how are things going?
Things are going great. A lot of exciting stuff happening. We missed you though. Glad you're back.
Good to see you.
You too.
All right. That'll do it for this Haason Reddick themed episode of the PHLY Eagles podcast. We are back tomorrow at noon all week, barring another emergency podcast. We'll see what happens. But we're going to start getting into sort of like big picture draft stuff. And then next week and the week after, we're going to go position by position and get into these specific players. Hopefully some good guests along the way. It is fully draft season. As Zach said, it's a buzzy time, and we are here to get buzzed with you. So for Zach and Julia, I'm Bo. We thank you for listening. Happy April Fool's Day. And for all of us here at PHLY, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, subscribing, hit the like button, all that good stuff. We will talk to you tomorrow. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.